the early 17th century, a trade route was set up between Great Britain and various parts of Eastern Asia. The route that dealt mainly in commodities such as silk, cotton, indigo, dye, salt, saltpeter, opium and tea would, over the following 2.5 centuries, go on to form comparatively the most profitable corporation in the whole of human history. Its name, the East India Company. At its height, the company had its own army, governing large portions of Indian territory, leading to company rule in 1757. After a rebellion by the natives a century later, the Government of India Act was passed, effectively shifting control away from the money men and into the hands of the then head of state, Queen Victoria. This led to a further century of British rule and would in time lead India itself to be dubbed the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. It's amidst this fascinating period of history that the film we're going to look at tonight takes place. Inspired by the works of Rudyard Kipling, Carry On Up the Khyber is in fact that rare beast, a piece of, some would say, parody, others homage, that I believe actually surpasses the works that inspired it to create something far richer, weightier, and complex in its themes. The noted character actor Sidney James, who we mentioned in the last review, here plays effectively the same character, albeit in period dress, Sidney Rough Diamond, governor of the British Indian province of Calabar near the Khyber Pass, patrolled daily by the 3rd Foot and Mouth Regiment. Joan Sims, who we mentioned in the last review, plays his wife. Bernard Bresslaw, who we mentioned in the last review, plays the fiery warlord Bungditin. As ever, the British everyman is represented by noted character actor Charles Hawtrey, mentioned in the last review, here given the moniker of Private Whittle, and British comic thesp and man of 4 voices, seriously count them, plays the Qazi of Calabar. I may have mentioned him in the last review. The bold decision taken by the filmmakers Thomas, Rogers and Rothwell to have an entirely white Anglo-Saxon cast portray a cornucopia of characters, many of which are of supposedly Asian extraction, was a bold one. Whilst you can argue that no one would have batted an eyelid at this in 1968, I find it hard to believe that a filmmaker with the intelligence of a Gerald Thomas would not have had the foresight to realise that this would be a controversial decision in 50 years' time. In that respect, the so-called whitewashing of the ethnic characters in the film was not the product of an archaic attitude and general ignorance and insensitivity towards other cultures that bordered on xenophobia, but more a direct statement by the filmmakers themselves to future movie-watching generations that said, "Look how far we've come," even though we're saying it in the past. I may be stretching here. Carry On Up the Khyber is not a film that shies away from the uncomfortable issues of racism and sexism. In the scene where our heroes are attempting to pass incognito through the Qazi's palace and are interceded by Bungditin's concubines, what plays out can be described at best as playful objectification of the opposite sex, and at worst as simultaneous sexual assault by 4 of our main protagonists, one of whom is Roy Castle. To put this in a film in 1968 was extremely daring and subversive, aside from the fact that this was Talbot Rothwell ostensibly writing the screenplay on the wall, as it were, and warning all that so-called Savile culture was just around the corner. Indeed, do you need any greater indicator than the casting of Castle himself as proof, if proof was at all needed, that this scene is nothing more than a warning sign, wary of 80s kids' TV presenters. Except for Roy Castle himself, of course, who, from what I understand, was a thoroughly decent chap in real life. But what is Carry On Up the Khyber really about? Well, at its heart, it's about a British kilt-wearing army regiment that doesn't wear underwear. And although this may sound trite, the very tawdriness of the central premise is what ultimately leads the good to victory in the film's climax. A hardened battle scene worthy of David Lean, and one of only a handful of times the Carry On series delivered on a vision that was veering towards the epic. And while it is both a biological and geopolitical fact that British men are considerably more well endowed than our Indian counterparts, this fact, and it is a fact, should not stymie the greater truth that the reason we managed as a nation to keep such a strong foothold in India for the best part of 2 centuries was simply because we happened to have the bigger balls. Terrifyingly big. Big enough to lead to the voluntary excising of a brute guerrilla force, apparently. When this film was made, the British had only been out of India for 20 years. In a way, Khyber is the last gasp of the empire itself, the final word on one of the most important periods of history this country will ever know. Also, for those that didn't realise, up the Khyber Pass is Cockney rhyming slang. This is why the film makes the ideal companion piece, with 1970s Carry On Up the Jungle. 2.5 stars out of 5.